Hi, my name is Paul Grogan and welcome to the fifth in a series of videos where I'm going to be teaching you how to play Aeon Trespass Odyssey. In this video I'll be covering some additional details relating to Cycle 1 and anything extra that I wasn't able to fit into the other videos. Although I'll be making every effort to ensure that these videos are correct at the time of recording, publishers sometimes issue errata or clarifications to the rules of their game. So I would strongly recommend checking the description of this video for any changes to the rules which may have been made after this video has been released. Also, be sure to check out the official list of errata and clarifications which can be found on the game's website. A big thank you to Into the Unknown for commissioning me to create these videos, but I also rely on the support of my Patreon campaign to keep the channel going. So if you're interested in supporting me directly, you can do so at patreon.com/gamingrules. This video is a little different from the others in that you don't need to watch all of it at first. I'd recommend only watching up to and including the part where I cover Hekaton, but leave the other primordials until later. Maybe watch those parts just before you're about to fight a new primordial for the first time. In my previous video, I briefly covered Pushback. Essentially, Pushback is similar to Knockback, except the primordial moves up afterwards. However, Pushback also works when not adjacent to a Titan. For example, here, if the primordial had Pushback 3, it would actually just move 3 spaces towards its target. No actual pushback happens. But if this was the situation, the primordial would first move to here and then push back the remaining 2 spaces. Those are some simple examples of pushback, but there are some more details to cover. First, at the start of a pushback, the primordial turns to face the target if not already facing it. Then, if the target is not adjacent, the primordial moves towards it using normal movement rules. So here, for example, the players can choose if Hekaton moves to the right or down. Let's say they choose down, and then the rest of the pushback happens. If a Titan is pushed into a destructible obstacle, remove the terrain tile from the board, and then the Titan suffers crash. Then continue any remaining pushback. If a Titan is about to be pushed into an indestructible obstacle, displace it to an adjacent space and then continue the pushback. If displacement is not possible or the only available space would be the one in which the primordial will then occupy, the Titan dies. Once the primordial has moved into the space formerly occupied by the targeted Titan, the pushback stops. For example, Ulysses suffers pushback 5. She is pushed to here, but then is blocked by a red line, which is an indestructible obstacle. The only legal space for displacement is here, but that space would be occupied by Hekaton's next movement, so she dies instead. Hekaton moves onto her space and the pushback stops. If a Titan is about to be pushed into the board edge, it is displaced to an adjacent empty space in a way that would allow the primordial to move onto the previously occupied space, and then the pushback continues. If displacement is not possible, for example, if there is a labyrinth tile in the way, or the primordial would move onto the space it could be displaced to, the Titan dies, and the pushback stops after the primordial has moved onto the space. Pushed Titans can move through spaces occupied by other miniatures, but if a Titan ends its pushback on a space with another Titan, the other Titan is displaced. However, any Titans moved through or landed on by the primordial movement during a pushback are affected as normal. That is, they suffer crash if moved through, and crash and unavoidable knockback if landed on. If a Titan is pushed back through any terrain tiles, they must apply any effects of those tiles pushed through, which is unlike knockback, where the Titan is effectively knocked over the terrain. And remember, sometimes Titans also have the ability to push some primordials back too. The attacks I've covered so far have been simple melee attacks which only target one Titan and require adjacency. However, there are other attack types in the game. I'm going to cover the ones here for Cycle 1 only. Later cycles will introduce more and I'll cover those in other videos. The type of attack is printed at the bottom of the card. A zone attack is performed against all Titans within the designated zone. For Zone X attacks, this means all spaces within X of the primordial. But in this special case, diagonals are counted. So here, all 3 of these Titans would be attacked by the Hekaton's Rumble Strike. You resolve all of the lines of the attack against each target individually, but notice the window of opportunity here. Let's say that Solon activates a reflex ability during that window and moves to here. Now only Herodotus and Ulysses are attacked. They must roll 2 evasion dice each, suffering 1 danger for each hit, and then be knocked down. Any time that multiple Titans are being attacked, you choose the order in which those attacks are resolved in. Thematically, those attacks are all happening at the same time, but practically, you resolve them one at a time. If one Titan gets a chain break during an attack, you still resolve the other attacks against the other Titans. One special thing about Zone X attacks is that they target the spaces, not specific Titans. Here, for example, there are no Titans within Zone 2, but the spaces of the zone were still targeted. This means that you do not resolve the routine card, which you would normally do if the targeting lines failed to find a target. However, you do still resolve the after final attack. Some AI cards show a specific zone printed on the card indicating exactly which spaces are part of the zone to be attacked. For example, Temenos attacks with its right tentacle swipe. Ulysses and Solon tie for being the closest Titan in front in range, but Ulysses has the priority target token, so she is the target. Temenos then moves as normal until Ulysses is adjacent. However, because there is a zone depicted on the card, the attack happens against all the Titans in that zone, not just Ulysses, so Solon is attacked too. In this case, the first part of the after final attack effect will cause knockback 8 to the left. And this affects the last Titan who was attacked, so the order in which you resolve those attacks is important. If you resolve the attack on Ulysses and then Solon, it is Solon who suffers knockback 8 to the left, knocking him into this column. Then the second part of the after final attack happens and Temenos places a labyrinth tile. If Solon were to get a chain break during the attack, it would cancel the knockback, but not the placement of the labyrinth tile. Simultaneous attacks are very similar to zone attacks in that they can attack multiple Titans in the order of your choice. Each Titan performs separate evasion rolls and suffers any additional attack effects individually. And again, any chain break does not invalidate any attacks against other Titans. A sequential attack is performed against multiple Titans, but individually one after another. The home run card, for example, targets the closest Titan. Then, if any danger was dealt, you repeat the card against a different Titan. Some sequential attacks say all Titans in path. For these, move the primordial towards its target one space at a time. But when it would move onto a space occupied by another Titan, interrupt the movement, resolve an attack on that Titan, and then continue moving to the original target. Unlike when a primordial normally moves through a Titan, this does not cause crash, so no +1 danger and no knockdown. The Titan getting attacked is instead of that. When the primordial reaches its original target, resolve an attack against them too. If at any point while resolving this type of attack, the primordial temporarily stops on a space occupied by a Titan to perform an attack, the Titan suffers unavoidable knockback. For example, Labyrinthauros is on the rampage. Herodotus is the target, being the furthest one in front in range. As usual, the players have a choice of the initial direction of movement for the primordial. Moving down first avoids an attack on Philoctera. Then it stops and resolves an attack on Solon. After that, it moves onto Solon's space, ready to attack Ulysses. This causes unavoidable knockback to Solon, after which Ulysses is attacked. Finally, it moves through Ulysses, but not stopping on her space, so she doesn't suffer crash or unavoidable knockback. And then finally, it attacks Herodotus. Judgments are special AI cards that represent mental assaults by the primordial. The target of a judgment must perform a special skill test instead of an evasion roll. In this case, a courage or will test. And it's the Argonaut themselves doing the test, not the Titan, so you add your skill bonus as normal. Because these are skill tests and not attacks, dice cannot be re-rolled with evasion rerolls nor blocked by block abilities. However, because they are skill tests, fate can still be used to re-roll dice as normal. And also, any danger from a judgment cannot be reduced by armour, but it still causes a trauma draw if danger was dealt. Some AI cards are ranged attacks. Some give a specific range, whereas this one is unlimited range, targeting all Titans on labyrinth tiles. The big difference with ranged attacks is the primordial does not need to be adjacent to carry out the attack. And to make matters worse, knockback and knockdown from ranged attacks still works even if not adjacent. Even though Titans are big, primordials are bigger. Some are so big in fact that you can climb them. Wounding some primordials may create a vantage point, a special place on top or inside of the primordial that Titans can then climb onto and strike vital body parts. Unless stated otherwise, the primordial vantage point must be created first before it can be used. When this happens, remove the interchangeable part of the primordial miniature and switch it with the vantage point part. Or you can use the VP space marked on the primordial sheet instead, which for some primordials is what you have to do as there is no variant piece for the mini. Once a vantage point has been created, a Titan adjacent to the primordial may perform a climb test as a free action by testing the skill specified on the primordial sheet. If you succeed, place your Titan on the vantage point. Only one Titan can occupy each VP at any given time. Once on the vantage point, you gain the benefit listed on the primordial sheet. Also, a primordial never has line of sight to a Titan on one of its vantage points. A Titan may move from a vantage point to a space adjacent to the primordial using movement as if they were adjacent spaces. If a Titan suffers knockdown or involuntary movement while on a vantage point, they must first be displaced to a space adjacent to the primordial. Titans on vantage points are considered both adjacent to and within range 1 of the primordial. They are also considered to be adjacent to any Titans that are adjacent to the primordial, but not the other way round. So here, Herodotus is adjacent to Solon, but Solon is not adjacent to Herodotus. A Titan on a vantage point measures range to other Titans and anything else from whichever space of the primordial is closest. So here, Ulyssia is at range 3 from Herodotus. Titans on vantage points are not considered to be within a zone if the primordial performs a zone attack. Primordials are generally not happy about Titans crawling all over them. At the end of the primordial round, most vantage points require you to perform a hold-on test to find out if you fall down. This is all explained on the primordial sheet. In this chapter, I'm going to cover some additional rules that I haven't mentioned so far, as well as any new rules that are introduced for this cycle. Some of these rules are specific to Cycle 1 only. Others apply to future cycles too. Labyrinth tiles are a type of terrain which are included as part of map setup for some battles. They can also be added during a battle through the means of AI cards, responses, or trauma cards. The red lines of a labyrinth denote the obstacle and obscuring part of the tile, meaning that they block Titans' line of sight, movement, and adjacency. Titans can, however, move freely through labyrinth tiles that are not separated by red lines. Primordials ignore labyrinth tiles for the purposes of movement and attack, but red lines do block their line of sight for targeting. For example, here, Hekaton does not have line of sight to Ulyssia. If Hekaton's attack requires line of sight, then the attack is not possible. But if it did not require line of sight, then the attack can happen normally. Finally, labyrinth tiles connected by sides showing green lines are considered to be a single tile for some game effects. I'll cover the rules for placing labyrinth tiles from trauma cards now, and then cover the labyrinth keyword later in the video. 4 of the trauma cards in Cycle 1 cause a labyrinth tile to be placed underneath your Titan. The shape of the tile to be placed is shown on the card. Placing a labyrinth tile follows the normal rules for placing terrain on the board. It cannot be placed on top of another terrain tile that is indestructible, such as another labyrinth tile. If it is placed over the top of a terrain tile which is not indestructible, that tile is removed. And this can be a great way to remove another terrain tile if you want to. You cannot place them so that they go outside the edge of the board. The tile may be placed underneath the primordial if you wish to. You must place the tile if there is a legal position to do so, but if there isn't, you skip placing the tile. The next thing I want to talk about is ambrosia, which is a mysterious substance, the lifeblood of the monstrous primordials. Some effects can cause you to gain an ambrosia token. Whenever you do, place one on your Titan sheet. Ambrosia tokens don't do anything on their own, but other effects in the game will be modified based on how many tokens you have. That is, however, until you have tokens in excess of your ambrosia limit, in which case the Titan immediately dies. A Titan's default ambrosia limit is 4, so if you have 5 or more tokens, the Titan is killed. Various things in the game, such as this suit of armour, can change the ambrosia limit. Despair tokens are also a thing you can gain during your adventures, and during a battle. As the name implies, despair tokens are bad. Whenever you gain a despair token, add it to your Argonaut card. Any despair tokens that you gain from story events leading up to a battle are with you at the start of the battle. Despair tokens only clear at the end of a battle. An important rule about despair tokens is that if you are adjacent to another Titan, these tokens have no negative effect. However, if you are not adjacent, you suffer the following penalty. If you have 1 despair token, you have a -1 precision penalty, meaning that you must subtract 1 from each die when performing an attack roll. A natural 10 is always a hit, and if you roll a 10 on a white die, then there is a chance of a critical. You don't reduce 10s down to 9s. If you have 2 despair tokens, you have a -3 precision penalty. 3 despair tokens and you cannot perform combat actions. 4 or more despair tokens and the Titan dies. Each time a Titan deals a wound to the primordial, they discard 1 despair token. Sometimes an ability can change your despair limit, which increases or decreases the number of despair tokens you can take before you are killed. Also, during the campaign, your Argonaut can become maze-touched, a mysterious affliction spreading throughout the lands. If you become maze-touched, note it on your Argonaut sheet here. Maze-touched has no effect on its own, but a number of things will be affected if you are suffering from this affliction. Strangers, represented by this icon, are foreign forces infiltrating the Argo. They may be spies, saboteurs, or just unhappy members of the crew. Track the number of strangers you have on the Argo sheet. Strangers have no direct effect on the campaign on their own, but other effects may be altered depending on how many strangers you have. In Cycle 1, you will come across symbols on some of the map tiles. I'll cover some of those symbols now, but there are many others. If you encounter one that you don't recognise, don't worry, it will be explained later. Progress, Doom and Titan icons were already explained in video 2, as well as adventure hubs and R&R symbols. There are also various cities on the map represented by this icon. Negotiation abilities as well as some other game effects require the Argo to be on a map tile with a city. Sometimes you will be instructed to place a token on an unoccupied city. An unoccupied city is simply one that doesn't already have a token on it. However, there are 2 exceptions to this. The last visited city token is still unoccupied, so it can have a token placed on it. And Knossos is always considered occupied, so additional tokens can never be placed there. Some map tiles are considered rivers and cannot be accessed until you have a technology allowing you to do so. The padlock icon reminds you of this. Here, for example, you cannot travel south to tile 24 unless you have the required technology. The Hekaton is the first primordial you will fight during the game as part of the tutorial. Many of the rules for Hekaton have been covered already, such as knockback, knockdown, pushback, and so on. Most of its attacks are normal melee attacks, but it does have 1 simultaneous attack and a couple of zone attacks as discussed earlier in this video. During the tutorial, you will fight against a level 0 Hekaton, which only has 6 wounds. It also has a -1 to its Aeon Trespass value, making every BP card easier to wound. And it has the friendly warning trait, reducing all knockbacks by 2. Note that this reduction does not apply to unavoidable knockbacks which cannot be reduced. The tutorial battle only uses columns, which are destructible obstacles. At level 1, Hekaton requires 10 wounds to kill it. It no longer has a -1 to all of its AT values, but it still has the friendly warning trait, so knockbacks are still reduced by 2. At levels 1 to 3, the battle setup also includes city terrain tiles. Unlike columns, these are not obstacles, meaning that Titans can move onto them freely. And in fact, being on one of them provides cover, which gives the Titan a +1 to all of its evasion die rolls. Cities have other effects based on your diplomacy rating with the local faction, so you need to look at the map tile that you are on to find the local faction, and then the Argo sheet to find your current standing with that faction. If you are allied with them, the local population help you, and while on the city tile, you gain a +1 power to each of your power rolls while trying to wound the primordial. However, if you are at war with them, then you treat the tile as an obstacle, meaning that you cannot enter it. Cities are reinforced destructible, meaning that the first time they would be destroyed, either from the primordial moving onto it or a Titan ending involuntary movement on it, you flip the tile over instead of removing it. You also flip the terrain card, which, as you can see, is now just normal destructible. So the next time it would be destroyed, the tile is removed. And another effect of the keyword inhabited is that if it is destroyed, you lose 1 diplomacy with the local faction. At level 2, Hekaton loses the friendly warning trait, but gains 2 new traits. Clever Boy simply means that the edges of the board are now cliffs instead of walls. Any Titan that would be moved beyond the edge of the board is killed. Try to find ways of reducing or avoiding knockback before taking on a level 2 Hekaton. The Fist for a Fist trait allows the Hekaton additional attacks. Each time you wound it, place a generic token near this trait. If you get a double wound, place 2 tokens. Then, at the end of the current action, if there are 3 or more tokens, discard those tokens and perform the Hekaton's signature attack. At level 3, Hekaton becomes harder to hit, with the to hit value increasing to 8. And also, before the battle begins, you perform 1 escalation. This involves removing a random AI1 card and replacing it with a random AI2 card, and then doing the same with the BP deck. Both decks are then shuffled, so you could end up with a level 2 card on top at the start of the fight. Also, at level 3, every attack from Hekaton that scores at least 1 hit deals 1 extra danger. That's 1 danger bonus per attack, not per hit. Hekaton also gains a new trait at level 3, Fleet of Hands, which increases all pushbacks by 1 and all knockbacks by 2, including unavoidable knockback. At level 4, you use a different battle setup which uses the maze fissures. These have the keyword chasm, which is fully explained on the terrain card, but essentially these are holes in the ground. Titans cannot voluntarily move over them, and if forced to move into one of them, for example from pushback, they die. When suffering knockback, Titans can be knocked over maze fissures, but if they end involuntary movement on one of them, they are killed. Level 4 Hekaton also has a speed of 7 instead of 6. It escalates twice before the battle begins, deals 1 extra danger per attack, and if that wasn't enough, all of its Aeon Trespass values on its BP cards is increased by 1. Remember also that after every battle with a level 3 or level 4 Hekaton, you gain 3 or 12 bonus ambrosia accordingly, even if you didn't win the fight. The other regular primordial in Cycle 1 is the Labyrinthauros. Once a clockwork automaton made by Daedalus to guard the labyrinth, it now races across Crete, bringing terror and death wherever it appears. The battle setup for Labyrinthauros is always the same, no matter what the level, with columns and labyrinth tiles already on the board. Instead of starting in the middle of the board, you look at the bottom card of the minor trauma deck. If the arrow in the bottom left points up or to the right, place the miniature on A. If it points down or to the left, place it on B. If it shows the circular arrow, you choose. Also in setup, remove the Gaze of Temenos BP3 card and place it to one side. You may need it during the battle, but it is not part of the normal BP3 escalation cards. Notice the 2 weak spots on the primordial diagram. Similar to rear spaces, there are no inherent effects of a weak spot, but certain things can happen during a battle which change the way that they work. During setup, place the labyrinth marker here. Whenever you see the keyword labyrinth followed by a number, you must place that number of labyrinth tiles on the board. For each tile placed, the type of tile is indicated by the position of the labyrinth marker, and you then move the marker round to the next position. I've already covered some rules earlier about placing labyrinth tiles, but when they are placed through this ability, there are some differences. Unless otherwise stated, labyrinth tiles must be placed so that at least one space of the tile is both in front of and adjacent to the primordial. This, for example, is allowed, but this is not. Labyrinth tiles placed through the Labyrinth X ability can never be placed under the primordial itself. If the tile is placed as part of an attack, it must be placed underneath the Titan who was the target of the attack. And if able, it must be placed under the most Titans as possible, as long as the original target is one of them. If for some reason a tile cannot be placed, the marker is still moved to the next position. When resolving a Labyrinth X ability where X is more than 1, each tile must be placed in such a way that does not invalidate the placement of the next tile. And also, the marker moves on each placement. So for Labyrinth 2, you would first place an O tile, move the marker to here, then place an L tile, and then move the marker to here. If you are instructed to add a Labyrinth tile to the board and there are none left, remove the tile that you need that is furthest from the primordial and then place it as instructed. The Labyrinthauros has a Vantage Point, the Bull's Back. As mentioned earlier, Vantage Points only become active once a BP card tells you it has been created. Once created, a Titan adjacent to Labyrinthauros may test Fury, needing 8 or more to climb onto this VP. If they succeed, place the mini here. A Titan on the Vantage Point gains +1 power to its power rolls, but also ignores all responses from BP cards other than criticals. At the end of the primordial round, a Titan on the Vantage Point must make an endurance test needing 6 or more. Failure means that they are displaced to one of the rear spaces and knocked down. At level 1, Labyrinthauros has the Maze Sense trait. This means that labyrinth tiles do not block line of sight. Also, any Argonaut with the Maze Touched affliction must apply all fate effect triggers no matter what their actual fate is. For example, when Labyrinthauros uses its roundhouse kick against a Titan whose Argonaut is Maze Touched, the attack inflicts knockdown, no matter how much fate the Titan has. There is one very important rule about fighting a level 1 Labyrinthauros that a lot of people have got wrong, making the game much harder than it should be, and that is trample. Trample is a keyword found across many of the AI and BP cards. However, trample is disabled at level 1, so you can ignore it until level 2. The only change to Labyrinthauros at level 2 is the addition of the trample trait. Whenever a game effect instructs you to perform a trample, Labyrinthauros moves at full speed in a straight line in the direction it was facing. At the end of its movement, it then turns to face the most Titans. This follows all of the normal rules for primordial movement, with any Titans moved through suffering crash, and any Titans landed on suffering crash and unavoidable knockback. However, in addition to that, if the Labyrinthauros tramples through or ends its movement on a Titan that already has the knockdown condition card, then as well as suffering crash and or unavoidable knockback, the Titan must perform an obol draw. At level 3, Labyrinthauros is harder to hit. It escalates once before the battle, and each successful attack deals 1 additional danger. It also gains the Maze Builder trait, which after performing a trample, it immediately performs Labyrinth 1. At level 4, Labyrinthauros escalates twice before the battle, each successful attack deals 2 additional danger, and all of its AT values on its BP cards is increased by 1. In addition to that, it gains the Maze Reactive Armor trait. This adds a fail response to each BP card that doesn't already have a fail response. The Hermesian Pursuer is a dangerous foe that will become active at some point during the campaign. From this point onwards, it will hunt you across the map. Whenever the Pursuer moves onto the map tile with the Argo, you must resolve a battle at the end of the current step. The battle setup needs columns and ambrosia pools. These pools are not obstacles, so Titans can move through them. However, if a Titan ends its movement on an ambrosia tile, it gains 1 ambrosia token. If a Titan moves through but does not end on the tile, roll a d10. On a 6 or more, they gain a token. As mentioned earlier, ambrosia tokens do nothing unless you exceed your ambrosia limit, in which case your Titan dies. Certain other effects in the game, however, will refer to the number of these tokens that you have. Also, during battle setup, shuffle the 4 flare cards and place them face down nearby. The Pursuer is always level 1. However, each time you fight it, mark the next numbered box on the battle track at the start of the fight, if able. The victory conditions for the battle are to deal the primordial a number of wounds based on how many boxes you have marked. For example, the first time you fight it, you must deal 5 wounds. And once you have dealt 5 wounds, you may choose to declare victory. If you do, proceed to the Victory Tease section. Or, if you are feeling up to it, you may choose to continue the battle. If you do, you can now only win if you deal 10 wounds or get an instant kill effect. And if you do, proceed to the Victory Killed the Pursuer section. Note that the Pursuer is really tough. Only try to kill it once you feel you are ready. Defeat against the Pursuer is also variable, depending on how many boxes you have marked. For example, the first time you fight it, as soon as 1 Titan dies, the battle ends. Retreating from a battle with the Pursuer is not an option. The 2 spaces immediately behind the Pursuer, as well as being rear spaces, are also blind spots. The Primordial does not have line of sight to a Titan in a blind spot, and also a Titan in a blind spot cannot be targeted unless the targeting specifically mentions blind spots. A Titan in a blind spot gains a +1 precision bonus to all of their attack rolls. As mentioned earlier, the Pursuer is always considered to be level 1, but it has a bunch of traits, and not all of them are bad. First, the Toying trait means that all of the Pursuer's attacks have 1 fewer dice and are -1 danger per hit. So its signature attack is only 3 dice instead of 4, and each successful hit deals 1 danger instead of 2. The Winged Doom trait is pretty easy. Thanks to its moth wings, the Pursuer has unlimited movement. The reason it has a printed movement value of 6 is that you may be able to disable this trait during battle, at which point its movement is reduced to 6. The Killjoy trait is infamous amongst players of the game. Killjoy triggers whenever you are specifically told to do so, but also if a Titan ever performs a full evade or manages to reduce the danger gained from the attack to 0. Reducing the danger that you are dealt from an attack to 0 is normally a good thing, but not with the Pursuer. When Killjoy triggers, the Titan must permanently lose 1 equipped gear card, not just discarded until the end of the battle, but actually lost. When fighting the Pursuer, it can often be a good idea to bring some spare gear cards with you that you're prepared to lose, or at least ones that you can remake afterwards. The Flares trait refers to the 4 cards that were set aside earlier. Whenever you are instructed to resolve a Flare card, draw the top one, follow the instructions on it, and then discard it. If the Flare deck is ever empty, reshuffle the discard pile to create a new deck. Flare cards have varying effects depending on how much Ambrosia tokens each Titan has, so try to avoid getting those if you can. The last trait to explain is End of Hope, and in fact, as long as the Toying trait is active, then End of Hope is disabled. Whenever you do manage to kill the Pursuer, one of the things you do after the battle is you mark the triangular box on the battle track. This means that from now on, the Toying trait is disabled. No more Mr. Nice Guy. And because the Toying trait is disabled, the End of Hope trait becomes active. Doubly bad. The trait itself is relatively simple. At the end of each primordial round, after it has resolved its normal AI card, it then performs its signature attack. As you can see, killing the Pursuer doesn't really kill it. It just comes back meaner and nastier than before. There is more to the story, but I won't spoil it here. The Alpha Temenos is the main boss primordial for Cycle 1 and by far the toughest battle you will fight. Where the Temenos appears, all hope fades. It is the cataclysm that came to Crete. The battle setup needs columns, cities and labyrinth tiles, all of which I have already explained earlier in this video. Like the Pursuer, the Temenos is always level 1, and each time you fight it, you mark the next numbered box on the battle track at the start of the fight, if able. The victory conditions for the battle are to escape the maze, which you do by dealing the primordial a number of wounds based on how many boxes you have marked. For example, the first 2 times you fight it, you must deal 3 wounds. When this happens, you may choose to end the fight or continue. If you continue, you may only declare a win immediately after dealing another wound. The more wounds you do, the greater your reward. Also, if you manage to deal 10 wounds, you kill Temenos and read the corresponding section in the storybook. It is not possible to retreat from a fight with Temenos. Temenos is an enormous creature, occupying 9 spaces on the board. This icon indicates that it is lumbering, meaning it cannot suffer pushback or be moved involuntarily in any way. It also has a Vantage Point, which can be created by scoring a critical wound on certain BP cards. When you do create the Vantage Point, you may want to switch out the removable piece on the miniature to give somewhere for your Titan to stand when they climb it. The climb test, the effect of the Vantage Point and the rules for holding on are all here and are similar to what we saw earlier on Labyrinthauros. Temenos has 5 traits which are always active, but the first of them, Ariadne's Logic, is of advantage to the players. Whenever Temenos is attacked by a Titan who is on a labyrinth tile, the Aeon Trespass value of all of its BP cards is reduced by 1. The End of Hope trait means that after resolving an AI card, it gets to resolve its signature attack, which is pretty nasty. Temenos also has the Labyrinth X trait, so you place the Labyrinth marker here at the start of the battle. And you will place Labyrinth tiles on the board as described in the Labyrinthauros section earlier in this video. Maze Sense we've also seen before on Labyrinthauros. It means that Labyrinth tiles do not block line of sight, and any Argonaut with the Maze Touched affliction must always apply any Fate effect triggers. Maze reconfiguration is very dangerous. Whenever Temenos would place a Labyrinth tile under a Titan who is already on a Labyrinth tile, that Titan performs an Obol draw instead. Since Temenos will be putting out Labyrinth tiles on a regular basis, be very careful with this. Because of Ariadne's Logic, being on a Labyrinth tile gets you a bonus when attacking, but being on one when you are attacked can be deadly. And that is the end of this video. You now have enough information to be able to play Cycle 1 of the campaign. But even though these videos have been long, there are some parts which you will still need to refer to the rulebook for. I hope you found this video useful. As always, please give the video a like, leave me a comment and subscribe to the channel. And as mentioned earlier, I do rely on the financial support of my Patreon to keep the channel going. So if you are in a position to be able to do so and want to support me directly, you can do so at patreon.com/gaming rules. Patreon supporters get exclusive access to the Gaming Rules community and some additional bonus content. Until next time, take care and thanks for watching.